Thank you so much. You're most welcome, Paul. And I wish you all a
Thank you,
lovely,
Joanna.
lovely session.
Thank you, Joanna. So, Joanna, just a bit of icebreaker. The other day, we were having a chat with Ronald, and they asked, what is the biggest move to make as an organization when you're setting up an ISO management system? And I talked about the brain, that is planning. Planning is the most effective action to actually set up management system. When you look at the plan, we check act. And today, we have a one, Dennis. Dennis Oyeng. Dennis Oyeng is a very qualified professional, the founder of Yenzi Consultants, and today he has spared his 2 hours to just speak about planning. Today, I wanted to just take a time to talk about Dennis before he comes in. He's a QHSE professional. He's a risk professional with over 15 years working experience in the field of health, safety, and environment. So just know we're in the right hands. I request that each and everyone be engaged. That now that we're talking about the brain, that means it needs us to pay close attention to actually understand the basic of setting up the systems. We are looking at 45001, that is occupational safety and health management systems, 9001, quality management systems, and 14001, environment management systems. And you'll see how prime distributors is going to have the challenges and also have the resources to handle this. So without wasting any more time, Dennis Oyeng, please, you're welcome. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Joanna, and thank you, Ronald, for this. Allow me share my screen. All right. So thank you again. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen across the world, in Uganda, in Kenya, in Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, those in the UAE. I hope you're doing well. My name is Dennis Oyeng. I have a master's in business administration. I also have a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering. I also possess a NEBOSH IGC, that is the International General Certificate. I also have NEBOSH Process Safety. I'm a certified sustainability professional with GRI, and also a certified risk specialist, and lead auditor in all the 3 standards that we are doing today, which is the ISO 9001 2015, the 14001 2015, and the 45001 2018. I'm also a founder of Yenzi Consults, a consulting firm based in Uganda that basically does consultancy services in occupational health and safety and environment quality and risk management, and also in ESG. So we also do environmental impact assessments, and we work with many companies, government, private sector, consulting companies, and also partners together to achieve the vision of zero harm. Today, we're going to look at clause 6. Clause 6 is basically the planning. And the theme here that we're looking at is the brain. The brain is because here we need to think. We really need to think. We need to apply our brain because we don't have to do a copy paste from anywhere, but we need to think. So welcome, everyone. I won't go much into the other introductions. I know Paul has really mentioned a lot about me, but just to mention that I've worked for different industries in power generation, basically hydropower. I've also worked in cement and clinker. I've done a lot of work with logistics. I've worked in the dairy processing, manufacturing of batteries and plastic recycling. I've done a couple of engagements and provided technical support to multiple small and medium scale enterprises across the country, Uganda. I've also worked in various countries, just to mention a few, that is Kenya, Tanzania, UAE, Algeria, Nigeria, and South Africa, where we basically were implementing and managing and maintaining management systems. So I come with a lot of experience, but just to share with you my experience, but also to learn from you, to engage with you, and to see how we can be able to add value. But also just to add on, in Uganda, we have a program on upgrading health and safety practices for SMEs in the oil and gas, and some for women-led enterprises. So providing technical support and a program called the GIZ Employment Skills for East Africa, but also there's a program called the Employment Promotion for Women for Green Transformation in Africa. And this is funded by the European Union and implemented by GOPA and GIZ. So I am here basically to take you through clause 6. And please, I really need your brain. I need your thinking, because here we are here to learn. Okay. So the key objective for tonight is to be in position to learn about 4 key items. And one is to be able to determine those uncertainties, those areas that could help us improve, which we call opportunities, that are related to things that can go wrong, or hazards, or environmental aspects, compliance, obligations, things that the law requires that we have, the laws of the land, good practices, contractual obligations, and implementation of the management system. These are very critical, and that is where the thinking then comes in, and that is where the brain is applied. Then the second thing is that we will have to be in position to set objectives which are SMART. That is to say, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound at different processes, departments, levels within your organization. And after setting those objectives, then how can we have clear, robust, concrete plans that we can put in place to make sure we achieve the vision that we have actually stated in our policy that we learned yesterday in clause 5. Then thirdly, we want to be in position to determine what are those compliance obligations, those legal requirements and other requirements, which are commitments, and be able to assess them, evaluate them, and put in position that when they are significant, then we need to be in position to set objectives so that we can be able to address risk along the way. Then fourth, we want to manage changes, the changes that happen within our organizations, in the plant, in the processes, in the policies, within people. So how do we manage those changes in a systematic, planned manner, in a controlled manner, such that we understand what are those impacts, what are those consequences, and what is it that we benefit from these changes? So it's very important that we are able to do this by the end of the day. So make sure that you pay attention. But before we start, for those of you who missed yesterday, I would like to do a recap of yesterday's presentation, which was the foundation. And in yesterday, we basically looked at clause 4 and clause 5. Clause 4 was basically about the context of the organization. Just to speak through it, 4.1 was about internal and external issues, where we are able to determine what are those internal and external issues that our case study that we are focusing on, prime distributors, is. So we determine those external and internal issues using the SWOT and using the PESTEL. In 4.2, we said, yes, as prime distributors, we do not work alone. We have interested parties. These interested parties also include workers. So they are internal and they are external. What is it that they need from us? What are their expectations? Okay. So having determined those expectations, some of them even become legal obligations. So we need to make sure that we meet those legal obligations. In 4.3, we looked at the scope, which is basically here. This is where we determine our boundaries. What are our boundaries in terms of physical boundaries? What are the key processes that we are looking at? And do we have any exclusions? Where are we located? Okay. So from yesterday, we said prime distributors does 5 key things. 1, we import and we procure, and we receive and inspect, that is 2. And we do warehousing and inventory management, and we repackage, we label, we do product knitting, because we focus a lot on repackaging of our items, which are basically electrical equipment, machinery, and some of them is we buy, we get products from Asia, and then we repackage it, we rebrand it, okay? And then we're able to put it back into the market. So as you can see, if you're an environmentalist, you're looking at only waste coming out. So think about that. The reason why we're looking at scope is for us to be in position to think through what are those aspects, those hazards. And then the other thing that we also do is order processing. Well, we process orders and then we're able to dispatch and distribute this through our logistic chain to the customers. Okay, so we have a couple of products, and one of them is industrial maintenance products. We have cleaning and hygiene products. We have facility and building and maintenance products. And we have associated service and supporting processes. We are covered in different locations. One of them is Nairobi, which is our headquarters, and Mombasa, which is our main warehouse, in Nakuru, Eldoret, Dar es Salaam, Arusha, and Entebbe. Those are our depots. Okay, so we have a lot of market coverage in East Africa. So we are based in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and of course the surrounding regions. We support the rest of Africa. And then in 4, we also looked at exclusions, where we said exclusions can be in terms of clauses of the standard, can be in terms of key or processes or departments where we can be able to exclude. So for example, we can be able to exclude design and development because as prime distributors, we do not design, okay? So, and then we can also be able to say, okay, we are not going to implement this in our Entebbe depot, but we can implement in other locations. So this is what you state in your exclusion. But remember that as you exclude, it should not affect the quality of your products and your services. So this was our scope, which was our 4.3, and then we went to 4.4, where we looked at process interruptions, and then we went to clause 5. And clause 5, we looked at leadership. We said leadership provides commitment, provides direction, which is very, very important. And in 5.2, we said, how does leadership then demonstrate this commitment? Then we talked about the IMS policy, that policy that shows commitment statements. For example, in environment, you're preventing pollution, you're conserving the environment, there's complying to legal obligations. In health and safety, you're basically trying to eliminate hazards and reduce risk. Okay, so all that is embedded into our policy. So that was the 5.2. Then we went to 5.3, where we talked about roles and responsibilities that need to be assigned to different operations. Because as leadership, you cannot do everything, but you need to assign those roles and responsibilities and cascade them. For example, you have first aiders, maybe you have firefighters, maybe you have a health and safety committee, whatever. So that was our 5.3. Then we went to 5.4, which was participation and consultation, where we talked about having health and safety committees. And we said that in some countries, for example, in Kenya, the limit is 20. But in Uganda, it's regardless of size. Okay, so regardless, we need to have a health and safety committee. So that is what we looked at in a nutshell for those of you who missed. So it's very important that you get the foundation right. The foundation helps you then to look into thinking, how then with this foundation can I be able to come up with risk, come up with opportunities, and then how do I address this risk and opportunities? Okay? So let us look at line of sight. Every time you implement this standard, look at a line of sight. How does clause 4 relate to clause 5, relate to clause 6, and the rest of the other clauses? So in short, clause 4 gives you the context. It's about the context of the organization. So it's really telling you where you are as a business. What are those issues? Who are your interested parties? Okay. And where is that scope? So that you can have a lot of focus on what you need to do in terms of implementing the management system. Clause 5 is basically about leadership. It's giving you direction. It's telling you who is driving the wheel, who is accountable. And this is very, very important because leadership provides resources, provides direction, gives a vision. So it's very important that you have clear direction. Clause 6 is basically about planning. And this is where you think. This is where you have the blueprint of your brain. It tells you what you need to do in order to address those issues that you picked up, which were in the SWOT. For example, the SWOT will tell you the opportunities and threats. Those become risk, okay? So it's very important that you pick them. Those external interested parties or internal parties who have needs and expectations. Those needs and expectations can become legal obligation. So it's very important that you come up with a plan. Those activities that are there can introduce risk, can have hazards. So it's very important that you think through the process and try to determine what are those risks and what are those opportunities, and how then do you coin objectives out of them using the SMART approach and be able to have a concrete action plan. So when you see clause 4, 5, and 6, you're seeing an integration. Okay. When you look at the ISO management system, it focuses on 3 main approaches. One approach is what we call the PDCA approach. PDCA is the Deming cycle, which is basically plan, do, check, act. Planning basically establish policies, objectives, and you see how then you are able to run this management system. In doing, you're implementing whatever you have established, and checking, you monitor and review, acting, and you continuously improve from then on. Okay, so as you can see, clause 4, 5, and 6 is basically the planning phase. And in this phase, we see a very logical sequence between clause 4, 5, and 6, because we ensure that our management system is specific and tailored to the realities on the ground. So we don't want to start from clause 6, and yet we have not built on the foundation. So it's very important that we understand these aspects. Okay. So to proceed, I'll give you an overview of what we're going to look at today. And this overview is very important because in the next slide, we will have a question to answer in regards to this. So the planning clause, which we said is the brain, it converts understanding. Converts understanding of your leadership commitment, of your understanding of the business into actions that you can actually feel, touch, and see on ground, so that they are measurable, are trackable over time, and you can actually go back to your policy and say, we had an aspiration in regards to, for example, zero harm or preventing pollution, and this is actually how it is on the ground. So we're going to look at clause 6.1.1, where we look at general risk and opportunity. This is where it says the organization has to identify risk and opportunities related to identified hazards, environmental aspects, compliance obligations, and so that we can be able to implement the management system. And it also tells us that we need to put plans in place to address those risks. Okay, so we're going to look at that also in detail. Then in 6.1.2, we're going to look at hazard identification and risk assessment, which is very linked to the ISO 45001 2018 standard. But also the aspect identification is very important because it's now linked to ISO 14001 2015 standard. So we're going to look at the life cycle aspects, perspective approach, which is not an assessment, but it's how you think through the life cycle process so that you're able to identify aspects along the way in order to prevent any environmental issues that may arise along the life cycle process. Okay, then in 6.1.3, we're going to look at compliance obligations. These are basically, what is it that the law of the land says? What are those contractual obligations? Are there certain things in the standards, best practices that you can follow? Okay, so we'll look at the process, how we determine legal requirements, how we assess them, and how we maintain them, so that we have a legal register which is compliant, that shows evaluation. And then we have to show monitoring of changes, or when the law actually changes or there's a new law that comes up. Then in 6.1.4, we're going to look at planning actions. Okay, and this is a summary of whatever you have now picked up as risk in 6.1.1, 6.1.2, 6.1.3. What are those actions that you put in place to address those hazards, those significant environmental aspects, those risks, those opportunities, and those legal obligations? Remember, the reason why you need a plan is because you've gone through the process and now you want to have concrete actions which you can trace and feel on ground and say, okay, now this is what we're going to act on. And having set those plans in place, then we're going to ask ourselves in 6.1, 6.2, is that where we have to set SMART objectives, okay? Taking into consideration whatever you've done through the risk assessment process, how you've determined what is significant in terms of legal obligations, and then making sure it's consistent to the policy, the IMS policy that you have, and also the plans, and also put in place concrete plans to achieve these objectives. Then lastly, at the end of this session, we're going to look at how planning of changes done. Sometimes we call them management of change. So changes will always be there, permanent changes, they could be temporary changes, they could be changing people plant, changing policies, changing processes. But the question is, these changes happen. How do you determine those changes and how do you implement them in a planned manner? So my question to the rest of you here is, we want to have an icebreaker before we start off. So the icebreaker is that which part of clause 6 do you find most challenging, most confusing, or frustrating to establish or implement and maintain? I know for those of you who have implemented the management system, or those of you who are certified, you will notice that there are some clauses within the standard that are a little bit challenging. So I want you to use the chat and try to type out your answers. Is it an A? Is it a B? Is it a D? Please choose one answer. We're waiting for you. It's very important that as we start off this, that we get to know where are your pain points, so that we're able to address and spend more time on those key clauses and be able to address them in this session. So I would like to see your answers.
We actually have some answers.
Yeah.
We have E, D, A, E, 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 A, E, C, E, C, D, E, C, D, D, E, the E, A and D. Someone say A and D. We have E. We have an E again. C, D, E, E, A, C, E, E, A, E, C, C, D, A, E and D, the same person. E, B, D and E, D, E. So yes, I think there are many E's.
Yeah, so from my side, I've been also tallying, and I think E will win it. E and A, they have about 11 of each. Then E and A, then followed by C.
Okay, so it's E first, then D.
E first, then A second, and then C third. D fourth.
Okay.
Yeah, all right.
All right. Thank you so much for the feedback. And I think this helps me to then put a lot of focus on change management. I know, like I said, changes do happen, and it's very important that as changes happen, we know how to implement change in a planned manner. So this icebreaker helps you to, it's very important. Like most spiritual leaders say that it's good to confess. When you confess, there's no pride. You're able to learn. So I'll put a lot of focus on change management and risk and opportunities, which is good. And of course, the rest of the others. And it's quite interesting how hazard identification looks like. We have a lot of health and safety professionals here, so they have gone through this for quite a long time. So we want to know how we can implement change and risk and opportunities. Okay, so thank you so much for that. So let me go straight then to risk and opportunities, which was the second. So in clause 6.1.1, we're looking at risk and opportunities. And remember, we're talking about brain. The brain is supposed to think, and that is why the theme is called the brain. Like I'd say, the three main approaches. And one approach that we are going to look at specifically for this clause is what we call risk-based thinking. Risk-based thinking. So the risk-based thinking approach basically says you need to think about risk when you're taking decisions, okay? Identify risk, evaluate risk, put up controls in place. Okay, this is risk-based thinking. So this clause requires a proactive approach to addressing both risk and opportunities. It's not the old way where, you're just focusing on risk and risk only. Okay, so in the standard, it basically says on your left-hand side, it says that the organization should consider issues. That is to say, external and internal issues, which we know were in clause 4.1. And the requirements of interested parties, which are basically their needs and expectations, which was clause 4.2. And then the scope, which was 4.3. So it says consider. You remember the standard talks about two keywords. There's one called consider. There's the other one called take into account. So here we need to consider these things. Okay. So think through it, and see how then we can be able to put it into play. So the second point is determine risk and opportunities related to hazards, environmental aspects, compliance obligations, and other requirements. This is what the standard says. And then the third thing it says that within the scope of the management system, which we have looked at, is that the organization shall determine potential emergency situations. Could be fires, it could be chemical spills, it could be anything that can disrupt the business. It could be something related to business continuity. Okay. And maintain documented information of risk. One key thing that you need to know when it comes to ISO, documentation is also very critical because it provides evidence that something actually took place. When you don't document something, then it shows that no work was done. Okay, so it's very important that you document this risk, opportunities as well, and there's already a strong focus on opportunities, processes, and actions needed to determine and address its risk. Okay, but one thing that we need to understand is, but what is a risk? Okay, risk is defined differently. When you look at the ISO 31001 and the ISO 45001 and the 9001, you will have different definitions of risk. But one thing that was tried to got harmonized is that risk is the effect of uncertainty. So there is uncertainty, things that you don't see, you don't feel, but there is an uncertainty there. So the effect of uncertainty is what we call risk. And uncertainty can lead to both negative and positive impacts. Okay. And usually they say that a positive deviation from a risk is an opportunity, but not all positive impacts of risk result into opportunity. I give you an example of, let's say you're in the oil and gas, and then you produce crude oil, and it's really in abundant supply, which is a good thing. But when it goes into the market, it can lead to lower fuel prices, which is not good for the business. It could be good for you as an end customer, but it's an opportunity for the business to invest material, equipment, and probably change that and convert it to another product or create another line, okay, and try to create opportunity out of that. So an opportunity is a set of circumstances that make it possible to do something, and usually to improve and add value for the business. The difference is that in the ISO standards that we currently have, in the new standard of ISO 9001-2026, which will be published in September next month, about the 16th of this month, is that there is a clear separation between risk and opportunities. Okay? The reason why they did this is that when you see on your left-hand side, when you read all that, you can decide to determine risk and keep quiet on opportunities. And sometimes, from my experience, it's very hard to create an audit finding because it's just 6.1.1. But this time around, they have split it. It's now 6.1.2 risk, 6.1.3 opportunities. So as we plan for transition into the new standard, consider and take note that you will have to identify and assess and manage risk and opportunities separately. And the focus is we need to be more proactive. We need to create value. We need to drive innovation. We need to support sustainable growth. So it's very important that we think about transiting and focusing on opportunities. And I hope this is really, really, really very clear. So one tool that you can use to determine risk and opportunities was discussed yesterday in the session when our dear Gladys took us through the SWOT analysis. So SWOT is basically strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So these opportunities are the opportunities now you look at here. You're determining opportunities. These threats are actually risk. Okay. So yesterday when we were having a discussion, I saw the chat, and there was a lot of talk about the Strait of Hormuz, the wars in Iran, and how it's affecting global supply chain. So today we want to look at this. There's a case study at Prime Distributors. There was a management meeting, okay, and it was reported by the supply chain manager that the Strait of Hormuz was putting pressure on packaging supply. And this was leading to rising resin prices, which is basically one of the ingredients that you need to create packaging material, and longer lead times. Okay, basically that means it'll take you long for you to receive your items. Okay, and then higher freight costs. So the general manager, who you can see there, then asked the supply chain manager with the rest of the team to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and determine actions needed to address the uncertainty and give them feedback. A truly good general manager or top leadership would ask their team, go through the process of risk assessment, determine action, and give me feedback. Okay. On the right-hand side, you're seeing the ISO 31000 process flow, where you basically identify risk, you analyze risk, you evaluate risk, and you do risk treatment, okay, and record and report risk, okay, monitor and review, communicate and consult. This is basically our risk management process. So you have this scenario. It could be a similar scenario because the Strait of Hormuz crisis has actually affected many businesses. The question is, do you do risk assessments within your business? If the answer is no, please think about it. Now, how do we show that a risk assessment has been done? You remember, one of the things that is very critical is that you need to document the risk. One way you can document it is to put it in a risk register. So we have this simple risk register that is before us here. Here we say the risk is packaging supply disruption, because we have a disruption which is caused by the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. What is it leading to? It's leading to increases in resin costs, transportation costs, long lead times, higher packaging costs, which will definitely affect the customers because we deal in packaging. And then buyers may face delayed deliveries because you make your orders, but as prime distributors, we have to wait because we're affected by all these crises that is taking place. Then we use a 5x5 matrix in prime distributors. So we use a 5x5 matrix where 5 is most likely. So given that the Strait of Hormuz crisis is still ongoing, this is a 4, the impact is great because, we depend a lot on packaging materials coming in and other items and materials coming in from the Middle East. So this can even lead to close of business. So given that we are looking at this scenario, and as we evaluate this risk within our management review, we saw that the risk is actually 16. So it's a 4x4 giving a 16. And when you look at our risk heat map, it's a high risk. So what does it mean? It means that as prime distributors, we came up with controls. What controls do we need to put in place to address this risk? One, you can think of rerouting cargo shipment, okay? So we don't have to go through the strait. Maybe we have to go through another strait or another means. Or we can use air transport, okay? Which could be other options. They could be expensive, but they are options. And then you can have different suppliers. You might have some in Europe, maybe some in Australia, or some in South America, or in other parts of Africa. And then we also need to make sure that our stock is actually sufficient, such that and we're building resilience, such that during a crisis, we're able then to just go back to our stock and it can take us through different months. And this is an example of a risk register that you can have in your business. Okay. And of course, when you have some questions, you can ask and put them in the chat. So I would like to ask this question, which is our first engagement. The question is, when an organization plans actions for clause 6.1, okay, which is actions to address risk and opportunities, what must it base those actions on? Okay, so when an organization plans actions for 6.1, what must it base those actions on? Is it A, employee personal preferences or budget limits? Is it B, the context of the organization, which is basically internal issues, external issues? Okay. Is it the internal audit non-conformities from the previous year only? Or is it immediate corrective actions from suppliers? What is your feel? What is your take? Would I get some answers from the participants here?
Yes, we have answers B.
So we have an answer on B. Is there another answer?
We have most answers on B. We have one answer on A.
We have an answer on A.
There is also someone else who said all of them.
Oh, okay, that's quite interesting. So we wanted one answer.
But we have mostly B. Then we have A. Yes, then all of them.
All right. So thank you, Joanna, for this. Of course, as we give our answers in the chat, it's very important that as we look at actions to address risk and opportunities, we need to consider the context of the organizations. Why? Because this is where we have the external issues, which is the 4.1, okay? Internal issues, where we have the interested parties and their needs, where we have a scope. So it's very important that we look at this, okay? So employee preferences, budgets, no. Let's look at what is it that the organization has in terms of its boundaries, in terms of its scope, in terms of its expectations, and also in terms of its needs, and also their requirements. Okay. As we carry on, we're going to now look at 6.1.2, which, according to the participants here, they say it's not something so hard to do because, I believe you're health and safety professionals, but let me walk you through because I believe not everyone is at the same page when it comes to hazard identification. So the standard says in 6.1.2 that the organization shall establish and implement processes for hazard identification that is ongoing and that is proactive. Okay, so it has to be proactive. It has to be a proactive process that if it's ongoing, that means on a daily, there has to be a process or a program in place within your organization that shows that hazards are being identified. And one of these ways I've seen in many organizations, even at the prime distributors, is that we have a process where we do our chamber works and we pick up all hazards on the ground and report them to the health and safety and also to other subject to responsible persons so they can be able to address them. So they can use AI. You can have a QR code in different areas within the workplace so that you can be able to monitor boots on ground, people are present on the ground, and they can be able to report these hazards. Okay, so the process should take into consideration work organization, routine activities, and non-routine activities. Most of the time when we do hazard identification, we forget there are also non-routine activities, maintenance activities, shutdown. There could be emergencies that happen. All that releases different hazards. Okay, so it's very important that we focus also on places where incidents have happened in the past because they happen because hazards happen there, near misses have happened, lost time injuries have happened, and then you realize there's a fatality. Okay, so it's very important to really focus on where are the risks. Okay, but the question is, do we really know what a hazard is? A hazard is defined as anything that has a potential to cause harm. Okay, the standard says a source with a potential to cause harm or hazardous substance. Can be a trip cable, it can be an open manhole. So those are hazards. And in prime distributors, we use a rating of how we evaluate this risk. Okay, so we use a 5x5 matrix where a 5 in severity means fatal. That means that when you rate a risk to be 5, that means it has a likelihood, a very high likelihood that it will lead to death. Okay, and then 1 being no injury. So it follows through the scale, first aid, hospitalization, and permanent disability up to death. So that's how we rate our risk. Then in terms of likelihood, we also use a 5x5 because we want uniformity. 1 being very unlikely. It's very rare that maybe in exceptional circumstances it will happen. But a 5, it means it can happen any time. Okay. And then, so we use a risk matrix, or sometimes we call it the heat map. And then we're able to say if a risk is 3, and a likelihood is 3, and the severity is 5. So the 3 times 5 gives you, so a 3 in terms of likelihood could be here. Okay. Then in terms of likelihood is here. So, and then in terms of fatality, in terms of severity is a 5. So if a 5 is here, you go here, and then you're able to determine that your risk is 15. Okay. So this is how we evaluate a risk. And then we're able to tell, okay, so 15 means what? It means it's a very high risk. So the question is, what do you do? And usually when you conduct a hazard identification and risk assessment and you determine that the risk is actually very high, okay? First of all, you don't do that work until you put controls in place to bring that risk, which is what we call residual risk, to an acceptable level. So it can be maybe a 9 or anything between yellow to green, okay? Because that is where then you do your ongoing monitoring and supervision. So this is one way you can assess risk. So I'll give you an example here at Prime Distributors, and case studies usually help. So we have office cleaners and different depots and warehouses. So they inspect the sites and engage workers during the process of hazard identification. So they have a tool that they use, tabs that they have. So it's an hazard identification checklist. So they identify hazards and they list them in that hazard risk assessment register. So all our documents are uniquely coded, as you will realize in clause 7.5 when the next facilitator takes you through documented information. We will find that all our documents have unique ratings, so you can see. And then we assess the level of impact and likelihood on a scale of 5 by 5, and then you're able to tell where does it fall. And then this risk register is then signed by office cleaners and then reviewed by occupational health and safety officer, and then approved by the OSH administrator. The reason why this is done this way is because we want to involve our office leaders, cleaners, in the process of identifying the hazard, okay, and assessing the risk. And the reason why we involve the OHS officer is because they want to see that the process of hazard identification risk assessment was actually followed. They may not be subject matter experts in this, but they just want to make sure, okay, is everything okay? Are you using the hierarchy of control? Or you're basically telling us use PPE. And a lot of companies do that. You find use PPE and you wonder what use PPE means. And then also have it approved by the office administrator. So there's that accountability, there's that ownership that, yes, I know and I understand this. So risk. So hazard risk register is then communicated. We usually communicate them in our boards, notice boards. We have placards. So as they're cleaning, you have a whole document pack there. So if you want to understand what are the risks of this cleaning activity or work at height activity, they're cleaning window panels, you all see it there. And then those significant hazards, usually we are discussed in management and they're considered while we are setting objectives. So this is the process of hazard identification at Prime Distributors. One lesson that we have learned, you need to have a documented process. How do you conduct hazard identification? How do you conduct risk assessment? And then involve workers and subject matter experts. You may not understand everything, but involve them in the process. Then significant hazards need to be taken into consideration when you're setting objectives, because what's the use of going through a whole journey of trying to evaluate a risk and it's significant and it's not an objective? There are no concrete plans to address it. So it's very important that we focus on that. So the evidence that usually during the audit or while you're implementing the management system is that you need to have a documented process of how you identify hazards, risk assessments. You need to have a hazard and risk assessment register to show that actually there was record that you have identified hazards and you have assessed them. And then there has to be a criteria. What did you base on to evaluate this risk? Is it a quantitative approach? Is it a qualitative approach? So usually quantitative approaches are good because you're able then to know where they are and then try to come up with mitigations along the way. So on the right-hand side is one good practice of how you can actually have a hazard identification and risk assessment process. One, you identify the activity, what work is being done. Remember, there are many ways you can do risk assessments, okay? There are very many ways. But when it comes to ISO, it will tell you what you need to do. How you need to do it, it's up to you, but make sure you meet the requirement of the standard. So identify the activity. What activity is being done? Are you cleaning? Okay. Identify the hazard. What can cause harm? Okay, maybe it's a chemical that you're using, maybe it's jig that you're using. So that is the hazard. Who could be affected? So you have cleaners there. Okay, you could be having some stuff. Maybe you left to spill. They could slip and fall. And then evaluate the risk based on the likelihood, the severity, and identify controls. What are we already doing and what additional controls must be in place before the work actually starts? Sorry. And then you assign responsibilities. As you develop these risk assessments, you need to have responsible people. Who is the risk owner? Who is in charge of making sure that this risk is being mitigated? Then you implement controls. Check the effectiveness of these controls with time. Because if you do not, you may find a control is effective because you're doing supervision. But in the night shift, because you're not there, people are just walking around in slippers and they're climbing ladders and no one cares. So it's very important that you monitor effectiveness of these controls so that you know how then you can improve. So a risk assessment is a risk register is just a document showing you've identified the risk, you have controls. But risk management is an ongoing process. So make sure you have an ongoing process where you identify these risks, you assess them, you have controls, and you continuously improve. So one thing I want to say is that hazard and risk assessment is very, very important because it helps you to identify what are the hazards and what controls need to be in place. We're going to look at hierarchy of control in a moment. So whatever we have discussed can be put in a risk register like this. One, we have office cleaning. Okay, what is the hazard here? So we talked about, we're using chemicals. Okay, but what is wrong with these chemicals? Okay, so you can see like bleach, not something that you can put in your hand and it doesn't irritate. So it can cause skin irritations, can cause eye irritations, and can even irritate the respiratory system. But who would be affected? Then that is when you talk about the cleaners, the staff. Then you assess the likelihood. And remember, when you are doing this assessment, you're doing it as a team. Don't sit on your desktop, generate a risk register, populate it, go to Google and what? No, because that doesn't reflect the reality on the ground. You have to think, you have to apply your brain. Okay. And then you assess the level of risk and then existing controls and additional controls and responsible people. Good. And so best practice is that you need to have a documented process for hazard identification. You need to implement controls. Don't just write these controls, but you need to have a documented system for you have to have, you need to implement controls in place. Don't just write these controls in a risk register, but you need to implement them. So it's very, very important. Then you need to regularly consider changes because there will be changes in processes. People will change. You'll be working. Maybe you're carrying out work at height, and because there's no one working below you, okay, it's okay. Then all of a sudden, someone wants to do some activity below. So the risk totally changes because now there's a drop zone, there's all that. And then you have to think about how then do you manage this risk? And then consult with workers, subject matter experts, people who know the risk better, because those workers who are actually working, operators and all that, they know. You as a health and safety professional or any other expert or manager, you may not understand the risk much better than they do. So involve them. One thing that I've seen in many organizations through my experience is that we do a lot of copy paste. Common pitfalls, copy paste. We have a hazard identification. You go to company A, company B, they have the same risk. And you're like, no. You have different activities, different scope, but you have the same risk register. So copy paste is something which is very common. So you need to find a way of eliminating these common pitfalls. The other one is that we focus a lot on routine activities, and yet we have non-routine. We have shutdowns, which have, when you look at the hazards, they're different because you're going to open machine guards, and then something else will happen, electrical, and then you have all these terminals open. So all these introduce risk. Fires, installations are different. So you need to make sure you incorporate a risk register that takes into consideration routine, non-routine, and emergency conditions. Then, treating risk registers as static documents. You have a risk register. You generate it very well, probably it's even signed, and then you file it, and no one else looks at it. Risk registers need to be live. They need to be living. Okay? They need to live living. It's not some dead body with a dead brain. The brain is alive. So we need to make sure that we treat risk registers or risk assessments as live documents. And then not involving workers in the process of hazard identification. This, we've talked about it. And then overlooking psychosocial hazards. I can't stress it further, but mental health is a big issue. Stress, fatigue, bullying, workplace violences, burnout is a very common thing in this time, in this era. That is why the new standard, the ISO 45000, which probably will get published early next year, is that it will focus a lot on psychosocial hazard, in addition to, of course, AI and whatever we've learned from the pandemic. Okay, so it's very important that we do not forget psychosocial hazards. They happen, and we need to put controls in place. So we got to 6.1.2. Remember, we have tackled risk and opportunities. We're now tackling what we call, we have also tackled hazard identification, which is very critical in the ISO 45001 2018 standard. But now we're going to also look at environmental aspects. Environmental aspects, those are things that interact with the environment. So it can be maybe an emission to the air, it can be probably a spill into a nearby water body. So those are things that interact with the environment, an element of these activities of the organization that interact with the environment. And then there's also what we call the environmental impacts. Okay, these are basically changes to the environment. It can be beneficial, it can be wholly, it can be partial, resulting from those environmental aspects. An example is, yes, you are emitting, you have emissions from, of course, our trucks and forklifts that are moving around. Okay, so what does it lead to? It leads to air pollution. If you have discharge, because we are cleaning and maybe we're using hazardous chemicals, there is a possibility that you can cause pollution to an underground water body or a nearby river. So that's what we call environmental impacts. What does the standard say? The standard says that we need to determine, and determine basically means you need to identify these environmental aspects of its activities, products and services that it can control. Why does it talk about control and influence? It's because control, when something is within your boundaries, you can easily control because you have policies, you have people, you have plans, you can manage. But there are those that are out. For example, logistics. For example, you're trying to transport an equipment from point A to point B, and then you have to put in controls because you've outsourced that activity to someone else. So that is why the standard says you need to have control, but also where you can influence those associated environmental aspects and impacts, and considering a life cycle perspective. Okay. So the question then is, when you determine these environmental aspects, what do you do with them? You need to determine them, but evaluate them on that 5x5 matrix that we have at Prime Distributors. We evaluate to determine which of these environmental aspects are significant. Okay, so it's very important to know which of them are significant. But most importantly, you need to communicate them. Whether you communicate them through email, whether through posters, whether through signages, you need to communicate them and say this is a significant environmental aspect throughout the organization. It could be in your policy, it could be in your websites. Okay. Having done this, remember, the standard says you need to consider what we call a life cycle perspective. I'll give you the example of Prime Distributor. So at Prime Distributor, we said we import these packaging items, machines and equipment and all that. And then, so it docks at Mombasa, it docks at Dar es Salaam, and all this needs to be moved to our different depots across the East Africa. Okay, so we have trucks that move around East Africa. We have our forklifts in the warehouses. We have and all these trucks moving on the road are emitting, emissions into the air. Okay, so the fugitive emissions in our warehouses, because we deal with packaging materials that are related to food, so we use electric forklifts. So these are also some of the things that you need to consider. Then because we repackage a lot of our packaging materials, we package and package them. So we see that we have a lot of waste that is generated from the process of packaging. Okay, and then we have cleaning. So we have companies that we give these items to, and of course we clean. We also clean in our premises. So there's a lot of effluent that comes out, which of course needs to be treated through our oil interceptors. And then after that whole process is done, there's that end of life. What do we use these packaging materials? Do we reuse them? Do you reduce them? So we have intervention that we put in place. And of course, that is what we call the life cycle approach. It's very important that as you are determining your environmental aspects, that you follow a life cycle perspective. Life cycle perspective is not a full life cycle assessment where you have to go into detail and do environmental impact assessment, try to, assess the impact of this. No, it's just think about it. Think about the life cycle, the different phases, and what environmental aspects, impacts come out of it. Okay, because we know there are significant aspects. If you do not follow a life cycle perspective, you will probably be focusing on your warehouse, your depots, and you forget about the logistics run and the end of life. So it's very important that we follow a life cycle perspective. So the question that we have here in our engagement quiz 2 is...
To cut you short a bit,
yes,
we have some questions.
Yes.
There's one requesting to elaborate on the risk appetite. Okay. Then there's also one who was asking that they are confused between hazard and risk.
Yes.
We also have a question that says, on risk register, you said it should be active based on the Excel spreadsheet, so it's soft copy in an audit. Do you show the soft copy spreadsheet and it's not signed? We also have a question on how can I know that this risk has a likelihood or severity of like 5 or 4? Lastly, we have, after how long should the risk register be updated and how to do it in Excel? And Dan also requests on you to go about the life cycle again. Thank you.
That's good. So life cycle perspective is thinking. You're thinking, you're not doing a comprehensive assessment of the entire impact assessment. What is the impact from, let's say, imports to logistics, to warehousing, to disposal? No, you're thinking about the different phases. Where do you get your raw material? How do you process it? And how does it go up to end of life? Okay, so it's thinking. So for each and every phase within the life cycle, okay, you're looking at environmental aspects and impacts. Okay, so life cycle perspective is basically you're trying to incorporate the areas where you have control and the areas where you do not have control. When you're shipping material from the Middle East, okay, so it will come through the port in Dar es Salaam. But this ship that is moving, yes, it has it's moving, but there are some environmental aspects and some environmental impacts. Okay, when it docks at the Mombasa or Dar es Salaam, okay, there is also so many. There are some carriers that have to lift it and and put it in a container or in a warehouse or a bonded warehouse somewhere. So those are all emissions. So what we're basically saying is that you need to consider the entire life from start to finish. In agriculture, I will give you an example of agriculture. You start from farm to fork. Okay, so from the point when you plant the seeds to spraying to harvesting and all the rest to the point when then you eat the food and dispose it off, you have to look at the entire cycle. Whatever you're eating in your it could be a mineral water bottle that you have before you, like the one that I have here. Okay, it's a plastic tube. Okay, so but you know that process that it went through? Plastic, where does it come from? You know, this tip, where is this paper? Where was it made from? The stickers, and till the process when it's finally displayed. So life cycle, you have to consider each and every phase of or life of that product or that service. So that is what we call life cycle perspective. So it has, you don't have to go so much into detail and conduct an impact assessment. No, just follow the entire life of that product.
Hi, Dennis. The second one was to elaborate on the risk appetite.
Yes. So risk appetite. So there's what we call risk appetite and risk tolerance levels. So risk appetite is I could say your appetite for risk. Remember, for risk, there are many ways you can mitigate risk. We usually talk about the 5 T's. So you either take a risk, you tolerate a risk, terminate a risk, transfer a risk, or you treat a risk. So those are the 5 T's. Okay. So in risk assessment, when you conduct risk assessment, you look at those options. Now, remember, risk cannot be reduced to 0. Okay. And that is why when you look at our scales, they all begin from 1 to something, and then likelihood begins from 1 to 5. So usually don't have a 0 because risk is always present. You can be in a room and the floor is well polished and it looks nice. It looks like there's no hazard, but there's a probability you can slip and fall even without a spill. Okay, so the risk appetite is that appetite you have to take a risk. Okay, risk tolerance is you can be able to take, but what is it that you can be able to tolerate? Okay, risk appetite is a little more stringent, and those of you who, of course, who are in finance, there's risk appetite and risk tolerance. So the inner circle is the risk appetite. So what appetite do you have to take this risk? Okay, is what we call the risk appetite. And risk tolerance is what can you tolerate out of that? Maybe our appetite for risk is we can only do zero incidences. Okay, but our tolerance, we can tolerate a first aid incident. Okay, so that is the difference between risk appetite and risk tolerance, just to differentiate so that you understand what risk appetite is. What's the next question?
The next one was, then you answered for Peter. This was about the risk register. You said it should be active, such as Excel spreadsheet, so it's soft copy. In an audit, do you show the soft copy spreadsheet if and it's not signed? I believe he meant to the auditors. Do you share this soft copy audit Excel during the audit?
Okay. So his issue is about the version of the evidence that you have. Let's say a risk register, which is in soft copy. Remember, I said it should be live. It should be ongoing. So you have to keep checking for changes that happen. Okay. So, but again, you need to look at what does your clause 7 say in regards to documented information. Does it say that your risk register need to be signed or not? Because sometimes they will say it needs to be signed, and if it needs to be signed, then yes, it needs to be signed. But if it's signed, it doesn't mean that when it's signed, it's now static. But risk keep changing, and that is why good practice is that when you document a risk, and I've seen it in many organizations, and we also do it at prime distributors, you can have a white board. Okay, so this whiteboard you write and put all your risk. Okay, usually for projects, and put your risk, your hazards, and then there are people who sign. And every time a risk changes, then it keeps getting someone rubs it off and then signs it, and from time. So it's a continuous process. Now the thing is that usually, if it's routine work, best practice is that you use standard operating procedure. So it's something that we clear. Okay, but if it's non-routine, things that could can lead to high risk emergencies, then you need to have a proper risk assessment. But the reason is because usually routine work is more or less the same. Okay, so the question is, do you have to show them the soft copy version? Yes, you can show them. But I've audited companies before where they show me a risk register or a hazard identification log. And while the auditee is showing you is actually changing things. So you need to make sure you control the integrity of your document. Okay. So, and that is why clause 7 clause 7 will come in, and that is where we'll have to clarify what is it in your organization that you do to make sure the integrity of the documents, your records, are kept intact, so that you don't show an auditor one, and then the other day you're showing them another thing. So you need to make it that you can show something and say, oh, at this time, this was the document. And that's why when you're tracking, let's say, risk registers, legal requirements, there is also a timestamp that is put on there and say, at this time, you change this, you change that. Okay. So you need to show, because an auditor like me, I will ask you that what shows that, you didn't change this today, or you didn't change it yesterday. And if you changed, what was the one, what shows that you are changing it? Is there any track changes? Okay. So it's very important. Next question, Paul.
There are a couple of many. Maybe you tell me the limit. There is one that I skipped from record, but I always confuse between hazard and risk. How can I know the risk has likelihood or severity of like 5 or 4? So there are two questions in one. Clarify hazard and risk, and then how to know that the risk has a likelihood or severity of like 5 or 4.
Okay, good. So a hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm. There are many types. There are many categories of hazards. There are physical hazards, chemical hazard, biological hazard, and name it. A couple. Hazard. Most of the hazards you see, but there's some hazards you do not see. For example, noise, vibrations, radiations. You don't. Risk is uncertainty. They are basically like things that come out when a hazard has already occurred. For example, if you have a trip, a cable that is, along a walkway, that is a hazard. So if you trip and fall, the tripping and falling, the risk of trip and fall is what is the risk. So it has not yet happened, but it can happen because of that. The other question is, how do you tell that it's a 3, it's a 4, it's a 1? So I just take you back to this, okay? And maybe not so much into this, but to take you back to this rating. So every time you have a risk rating criteria, you need to define, in terms of health and safety, in terms of environment, in terms of business, what does it mean? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For example, severity is a 5. A 4 is permanent disability. A 3 is you're getting hospitalized. A 2 is first aid. A 1 is no injury. So as you're assessing the risk, each and every one is giving you a number based on their thinking about what could happen. Remember, this is risk-based thinking approach. What would happen? So if, let's say, there is a cable that is running from one room to the other, and it's so small and so slim and so low, the likelihood of trip is probably a 1. But if the cable is a little bit higher and maybe in an invisible area, blind spot, then the likelihood is a 4 or something. Okay, so it gets higher. So you need to see how you make it realistic. So think through the process, engage subject matter experts, and you'll be able to do a comprehensive risk assessment process. Next question.
The next was, should we proceed?
Yes, please.
After how long should the risk register be updated, and how do you do it on Excel?
Okay, good. So how long should it be updated? As and when need arises, and usually as and when a change actually happens. Okay. So risk assessments should be live. How long you keep changing it? It should be as and when changes there, because it's changes that trigger when you should revise these risk assessments. And how do you do it in Excel? Yes, in Excel you can decide to create. I don't know, but I'm not going to go into detail there. But you can decide to create. Use your IT guy so that they're able to use a track chain, so that every time you input any data or even any information in Excel, it can show the date or the time when it was done. I'm not sure how I can do that, but that is one way you can do it. And best practice is, and I'll tell you this, best practice is, it will cost you an investment. It's an investment, but if you can look at having softwares, okay? So software, let's say ISO or management systems, okay? So this management system will help you capture this data as hazards or aspects or risk, and even be able to analyze it and measure it and give you reports over time. So best practice is you have a software that will help you do this together. Excel is good, but trust me, tomorrow you'll have a different version of Excel. It is on this laptop. The other person has another laptop. You updated this one, so many versions, and you'll get confused which one is which. So management system softwares actually do help quite a lot in that area. Let's go to this, environmental aspects at prime distributors. So I want to show you the process we follow at prime distributors. So when we are determining environmental aspects, the things that interact with the environment, okay, we consult with our workers, and these workers are actually the guys on the ground. They could be operators, could be forklift operators, it could be packaging managers and the people on the ground. So we identify potential environmental aspects and associated impacts through these Gemba works that we take. Interview them, talk to them, have a one-on-one conversation, and review manuals about these products that we are getting. And we follow a life cycle perspective. Okay, so we look at each and every activity from input to logistics to processing to time it goes to the customer, to the time then it goes and leaves the customer and then goes to for disposal, whether disposal or reuse. We follow that life cycle perspective, and all environmental aspects then listed in our impacts register. And then we go through another process where we rate them on a scale of 5 by 5, and then we make sure for every assessment we do, the people who are core, who are doing the work, actually they sign this document, who are the production workers. Then we have an environmental officer who reviews it to make sure the process was followed, is systematic, and the controls are effective. And then it's approved by the warehouse manager because they're in charge of the warehouse. So these significant environmental aspects are also communicated to staff. But during our management reviews, we make sure these environmental objectives and targets are these environmental aspects are taken into consideration when you are setting objectives. Okay. So one key lesson that you need to learn from this is that you need to obtain a documented process for environmental aspects and impacts, and follow a life cycle perspective to determine aspects, not life cycle assessment, but life cycle perspective. And then we need to make sure that all significant environmental aspects are taken into consideration. Not all, but some significant environmental aspects are taken into consideration when setting objectives. It's of no reason to have something significant and you do not have an objective to address it. Okay. And then key evidence that you need to have a documented process, how you determine, how you evaluate these environmental impacts and aspects. And you need to have a criteria that you follow. These environmental aspects and impacts, you also need to have a register for them, and you need to have evidence that you've communicated these environmental aspects. So it can be communication through signage, it could be a memo, it could be an email. So it could be something that you posted in your website. So whatever you do, but you need to communicate these environmental aspects. And some aspects are like the ones we've listed here. It could be about waste segregation, could be a chemical spill, and other emissions. Okay, so this is an example, and I'll probably take you through the very first one. So we remove packaging and repackage products. This is a normal situation that happens at prime distributors. So what is the environmental aspect here? Is packaging waste. Okay. But what does it lead to? Resource depletion, because we have paper. This paper comes from wood. Wood comes from trees. And if we're cutting down trees, then we're doing deforestation. So what's the likelihood that we do it? It happens on a daily. So trust me, the likelihood is high. The impact is also high. So it's a high risk. Like we said, for every time you determine environmental aspects and impacts, you need to look at different situations or conditions: normal, emergency, and abnormal situations. Okay. So in this emergency situations, we have sudden release of untreated effluents into the environment. So this usually arises from warehouses where we do a little bit of cleaning and cleanup. So sudden discharge of untreated waste into the environment can lead to pollution. So, however, because we have a state-of-the-art treatment system, oil interceptors, so likelihood is a 2. Impact, well, if it does happen, we have a nearby water body, so it could be really bad. So the risk is a 10, which is a medium risk. Then we also look at abnormal situations. We have machines that run pressure vessels that, keep hissing in sound a little bit for a short time. So that machine failure causing brief excess noise is something quite abnormal. So release of noise into the environment causes noise pollution. The likelihood not so high, which is 2. Impact quite high, but we look at the risk being an 8. So like I say, how do you assess risk? It's really based on the people that you're with, subject matter experts, people who are involved in that area. Through their consultation and participation, you're able to evaluate risk appropriately. So let us look at the best practice. So best practice is you need to have a documented process for environmental aspects, impact assessment, how you determine them. And then you need to make sure you follow a life cycle perspective when you're determining environmental aspect. This is very important. In the new standards, it basically emphasizes that as well. Then integrate significant environmental aspects into your process of setting objectives. There is no need of having something significant and you actually know it's significant, it's a risk, and you don't have objectives to achieve them. So it's very important that we integrate, but also consult with workers, subject matter experts during the process of assessing these environmental aspects through your committees, through your toolbox session, through your workforce engagement forums, so that you can be able to address these environmental aspects. Common pitfalls similar to risk assessments is that we do copy paste, which is not a good thing. We also ignore a lot of abnormal emergency situations. Spillages can happen. For example, you can be in the oil and gas or a cleaning company. They do happen. Fires can happen, and we have these scenarios at prime distributors. So it's very important that you do not ignore abnormal and emergency situations. And you need to treat risk assessments as live documents, not as static. And focusing only on direct aspects will not help you, because when you follow a life cycle perspective, you have to look at both the upstream and the downstream, including even the outsourced services, contracted work that you have within your workplace. So that is about aspects. So let me just run through the legal and other requirements. So legal and other requirements is basically about those legal obligations, compliance obligations that come from your laws, your regulations, your act, okay? Your commitment from the contracts. Sometimes they come from standards, regulators, trade groups. So those need to be taken into consideration when you're implementing the management system. So the standard says you need to establish, implement, and maintain processes, determine, and have access to up-to-date legal requirements. And these can be applicable to basically hazard aspects, but also need to make sure that these legal obligations that you have determined, you need to check, do they really apply? Because not all sections of the law will apply, okay? And then where they apply, then you ask yourself, are we meeting? Are we compliant? If we are compliant, where is evidence that you're compliant? Okay, and then put that in what we call a legal register. Make sure you obtain those licenses, those permits, and all the rest. So the picture that you see here is in Uganda. We have the Employment Amendment Act, which is a 2016. So we have the HR manager, we have the management representative, and the legal manager discussing the applicability of this new amendment in prime distributors. Okay, So I'll give you another regulation that came up in Kenya in 2024, which is the Sustainable Waste Management, which is the Extended Producer Responsibility Regulation, which applies to prime distributors. So at prime distributors, we track and maintain a list of compliance obligations according to the legal compliance procedure that we follow, and a list of other requirements are sourced from the internet, regulators, and legal services. We have the Uganda Gazette in Uganda, Kenya also has the Kenya Gazette. So all these laws, we're able to assess them and through our lawyers and our legal group. And these compliance obligations are evaluated for applicability. Okay, not everything in the law is applicable, but we summarize them, maintain them in our legal register, and we update them on a quarterly basis by the legal manager and the management representative. So what we have learned is that you need to have a process, how you determine legal compliance, how you evaluate legal compliance, but also you need to have a forum where you're able to update these legal requirements and with current obligations. Document the process of legal compliance, which is one of the key requirements, and have a register for legal and evaluation of legal compliance, and then have evidence, which is very critical. Evidence of compliance to legal requirements, which can be permits, licenses, certificates, reports. And I've seen in at prime distributors, we have a board where we're able to track when a new law comes in. We're able to see that we have this at our receptions. We have all the certificates, environmental impact assessments, environmental audits that we have done, and all other legal requirements are all embedded in there. So when you have this legal requirement that you've seen on the right hand side about sustainable waste management, you see that there's a new regulation which has come. You are the packaging firm and an importer of products. You need to go and read this regulation, because this regulation says that it requires all importers to manage the full life cycle of their waste, including post-consumer waste. Okay, so the extended producer certificate issued under this regulation forms part of mandatory clearance and inspection and documentation for an importer of any of this. And this is the Kenyan law. Okay, so those of you in other countries, you may not get this. So how then do you put that regulation into a legal register? So our legal register has columns. So it has compliance obligations, which you can see on the left-hand side. Then you have a section. So you list the compliance obligation. Then you go to that section. It's section 6, subsection 2. What does it say? It says each importer shall, for purposes of importing any of the products, apply to the authority for an extended producer responsibility certificate. Okay, a link. So you provide a link to compliance obligations. So if you want to see this law, then you double click there and it will open. So our status shows that for this particular section of this law, we are compliant. Why? Because we have an extended producer responsibility certificate, and you can actually attach it in this Excel document. And then, of course, most certificates come with conditions. So you monitor those conditions and see how then you comply. So this is an example. So you can have others, the Employment Act, you can have maybe your regulators in there, and many other regulations. But do not forget that you also have contractual obligations. You have standards that you follow. You have trade agreements. So all that needs to be included in the legal register. Legal register is not just about legal requirement, but it also talks about other requirements. So you need to make sure that you include that there. So common pitfalls. Let me go to the common pitfalls. So sometimes we fail to link activities and the processes that we have in our businesses to the compliance obligation. Remember, if you're an importer of a product, you know that the previous acts or regulation that we looked at is important to you. But sometimes you find someone generates so many laws, and you ask yourself, are these all applicable? So you have, for example, someone is dealing in waste management, but he has a law talking about dental. Then you're like, but how does dental relate to waste management? Okay, so you need to make sure that you link these compliance obligations to your activities. Okay, then secondly, is that failure to interpret sections of the law. Of course, we are not all lawyers. We are not land people like the lawyers say they are, but we need to make sure we get expert guidance. So you can have a law firm trying to interpret for you this information so that you can be able to analyze it better. Then treating legal registers as static documents. Yeah, legal registers and other registers are truly suffered. They become static, but they're supposed to be live documents. And then sometimes we focus on legal legislation, which is not a good thing. So we need to make sure that we focus on also other voluntary and contractual commitments so that we can be able to avoid these common pitfalls. So allow me just ask you this question. How do compliance obligations connect to risk and opportunities? How do compliance obligations connect to risk and opportunities? Do we have answers on the chat?
Dennis, let's engage in the chat. How do compliance obligations connect to the clause 6.11? Those are risks and opportunities. We're over 159. Could we have some engagements in the chat, please? As we wait for the engagement, just a question for you, Dennis.
Yes, please.
Yeah, we have an answer. Being fully compliant reduces the risks. Thank you, Mary. Can we hear from others? We had a question that was asking you to share some of the best softwares that can be used for managing ISO systems, basically QHSE. So as you have that to answer, however, we have some answers. From Samuel, failure to comply with legal obligations could lead to legal actions like fines. We also have an answer from Paul. Determination of legal requirements and other requirements is where compliance obligations are formally identified. Thank you. Being compliant reduces the risk of being prosecuted. Joshua says failure to plan for the applicable legal and compliance obligations can lead to fines. We also have someone else, Jonah, saying fines and charges if the legal obligations are not met. Clinton says it also gives you opportunity to clients that need such legal requirements. Gregory says there are tenders, projects, or clients who might meet their requirements and standards. This includes compliance. And Lauren says being compliant prevents business interruptions, which promotes smooth business running opportunities. Thank you very much. Kindly keep all the engagements in the chat. We have more answers coming in. Then compliance could, yes, legal requirement not met can give you a bad image. Compliance is part of the issues in clause 4 under the context of organization. So it's like regulators have the power to close the business. You also have complying gives you contractual opportunities and good reputation. Yes, we have compliance obligation, whereby being non-compliant increases the risks on the businesses and lowers business productivity. I think we can carry on from that as we have more engagements in the chat. Thank you so much for engaging. Let's keep engaging in the chat.
All right, thank you, Joanna. Just to respond, so there are many softwares that you can use, and of course, over time they are being upgraded. But there's one particular one that I used to use, which was called Isometrics. So it does for a couple of things, and of course, when you go to clause 9, where you talk about, when you have data, it's one thing having data. You can have hazards, you can have environmental aspects, you can have incidences logged in, and so many other things. But if you're using an Excel sheet, trust me, you have sheets all over the place. The next time management asks for the report, you don't know which one is which. So software is very important. So Isometrics, I've used it before. I know there are other tools that probably are there that maybe do it much better. So you're able to get that data, it converts that data, analyzes it, makes informed decision, and actually creates a trend over time and makes you a report. So if you use that tool or you have that management software, it does for you a good job. You are, let's say, an HSC professional in a company A, you'll be able to to be able to ease your work, so you don't have a lot of Excel sheets, moving all around, but you can be able to analyze that data in a very coherent way and be able to make informed decision. The next time management wants a report about what happened in the last quarter, you don't have to go typing so many things. You need to embrace AI and embrace digital, embrace these new tools that are coming, so that you're able to analyze data in hours, in minutes, and you have a report. So you don't have to take a whole week and trying to take this report. No. Have a tool, a software that you can have, that the company can afford, because it's about, resources sometimes, but you can have that. If you can't afford that, yes, then there are some ways you can automate your Excel in such a way that, you'll then, it's a little bit manual, but then you can be able to put formulas in there, and then it will create you trends and graphs, but just make sure you keep that one Excel document. The moment you have several documents, trust me, you'll get misaligned, or you lose direction on which tool to use. Okay, so allow me carry forward. We have covered quite a lot by now, but I would want to finish up with this one on 6.1.4 before we take the break. So planning for actions. Having understood the risk, the opportunities, the significant environmental aspects, the compliance obligations from our interested parties, we need to make sure we have plans. Okay, we need to make sure we take into consideration the hierarchy of control. We need to check the effectiveness of these controls. So hierarchy of control basically means that we need to focus on what is most effective. Elimination is one thing that we desire because it removes the hazard. Okay, substitution, yes, replaces the hazard. Engineering control isolates people. So an example of elimination is maybe your for example, you have a chemical that you're using and maybe it's hazardous, but because you no longer want to use that chemical, you can discard it. And so you've eliminated the hazard, okay? Or you're trying to clean maybe at heights, instead of using scaffolding and, all that harnesses and all that, you can decide to use a tool, and the work at height has been eliminated because you're cleaning from down, okay? Substitution, you have a dangerous chemical, you substitute it with a less dangerous chemical. That is what we call substitution. Engineering controls, sometimes you have hazards and you cannot eliminate them because you have a rotating part of the machine. So you decide to install a machine guard so that someone's finger, someone's limb doesn't get stuck in there. Administrative controls, basically supervision, you're basically doing training, you're having signages in place. They're good. They are good. Sometimes it helps change the way people work. The last line of defense, least effective, is PPE. It doesn't mean that you don't need to use PPE, but there are sometimes when you can apply all the rest, but the risk is still there. So you have to protect the worker with PPE. PPE is basically personal protective equipment, which can be helmets, safety shoes, gloves, depending on the risk that you have. So follow the hierarchy of control. So when you have your risk register, don't just go and put use PPE, use PPE, use PPE. Basically, it means that you did not follow the hierarchy of control. What is it that you can eliminate? What can you substitute, engineer, and which administrative controls can you apply? So, and then we also looked at the options of risk, where you avoid the risk, you share the risk, you take the risk, you mitigate the risk. Avoiding risk is you decide not to take that alternative or that decision or that activity, saying, no, we're not going to do that work because it's a risky work. Sharing risk, you look at an activity being done and like, no, as a business, we're not going to do this job. We can outsource it to someone else. Or we can have maybe a workman's compensation, because the risk has to be shared in case someone happens. It's not only on us, but also insurers can be able to cover. Take the risk. You see the risk is within the risk appetite. You can tolerate it. You can take that risk. So you decide to take the risk. Mitigating risk is when you have now controls. So just to reduce on either the likelihood or the impact or both. Okay. And then we have also options to address risk. We can launch new products. We can build partnerships. We can use technology where we have visual aids, where we have QR codes, all that. We can go into new markets, okay? And as we talk about this, we're talking about quality, health, safety, and environment, all combined as one management system. So when you're planning, you need to plan for those. Okay, so at prime distributors, I'll give you an example. We have distribution of products using our vehicles. So one of the risks that we faced was we have high traffic accidents due to driving, reversing, or forklifts in our warehouses. So the plans that we took is have defensive driving training, okay, for our forklift operators, for our truck drivers. We also have driver feedback sessions where we give them feedback on the trips that they have made. So after a trip, we give them feedback. This is how you perform at this point in the journey. You were either harsh braking, harsh accelerating. And then we also have in-vehicle monitoring systems. So we monitor their driving behavior so that they do not overspeed or harsh accelerate or harsh brake. Then we reward our good drivers and recognize them. And we rank drivers in terms of green drivers, amber drivers, and red drivers. So green drivers basically means that you are you do not you do not meet any offenses or violations during the course of driving. And then we also do, since we outsource some of our distribution activities, we check our transporters to audit them whether they actually have following the transporter management system. Then we have preventive maintenance for our fleet of vehicles, and we have a fatigue management procedure that we follow. So checking all this, being fully effective, the person responsible is our logistics manager. So this is how an action plan looks like. You've looked at the risk from aspects, compliance obligations, hazards, and all that. So you're coming up with an action plan. Remember, this action plan is just an action plan. It's still not smart. It's still not concrete. So that is why we need to focus on planning. Planning is very important. So we're trying to move from risk that we understand to planning and making sure that it's concrete. But one common pitfall is that we treat PPE as the main solution. So we don't need to write in a register that use PPE, yet we have elimination, we have substitution, you have engineering controls. So first test all that through the hierarchy of control and see whether all these other controls are actually working. Action plans treated as one-time documents. So you have an action plan, you have it, it's static, and it's filed. But remember, these risks keep changing. So we would expect the action plans to also keep changing. We have seen most of the time action plans focus on housekeeping issues. They're not even assigned to people. So you have an action plan, the person who probably it's even assigned to does not even know about it. So there's need for communication. We have also seen that action plans also remain at business level. So at operational level, someone does not know about the action plan. So it's very important that we avoid these common pitfalls. Okay. And of course, best practices are more or less the opposite of what we have said. But the last point there in the best practices is we need to integrate action plans into the business using management softwares like the isometrics and the rest, so that you can be able to be able to, first of all, collect data, analyze data, make informed decisions, make a report to get. So it's very important that you incorporate that into play. So we would like to take a break at this point, so that when we come back, we'll look at 6.2 and 6.3, which is change management. Over to you, Paul.
Wow. Thank you, Joanna. I believe this was worth it of shaking the brain a little bit. Thank you, Dennis. Dennis, please, you deserve the break. Yes, Joanna, what do you have for the people during this time?
Yeah, I
Dennis, you
request the
can see the
people
claps.
to give the reactions. I can see some reactions. Let's give Dennis some reactions. Remember, as professionals, we value our health. So I advise us to get up, stretch. At the beginning of the program, I had requested us to have a cup of coffee aside so you could stretch, get the time and stretch. Try to get up from that seat. Try to do some press ups, Then I'm going to invite Douglas to kindly take
We'll
Kelo,
get with
kindly
the
mute.
person.
Douglas, I would love to invite Douglas to tell us about the upcoming conference as we take on our break. Douglas?
Right.
Yes. Thank you, Joanna. Hope I'm audible. Yes, thanks everyone, and thanks for the presenter. The presentation and the material that has been shared has been a blockbuster. I personally am learning, and I'm looking forward to implementing all these pointers and also being compliant. I'm someone who's trying to adjust change management, so it's something I'm trying to take on. Shortly, let me take you through the conference. SHAO, in partnership with TOHASA and Westpac, as well as the Ministry of Gender, we are organizing the first inaugural conference that is for the 2026. That will be next week on 27th to 28th of August. I shared the poster in the group, and if it's possible, the host can allow me to shortly share my screen with to present the flyer. So this conference has a theme of building resilient and inclusive workplaces. That is OSH for formal and informal economies. I don't know if people have any questions. This is going to be at the Imperial Hotel in Kampala, and we are going to have different experts from different areas, from Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Southern Sudan, Rwanda, all around the East African community, as well as delegates from other countries. And we want to welcome you. The knowledge that we are learning from this is the same thing that you can share with other people. Some people want to know, how do I become a lead auditor? How do I transition this? So through this online training, we are trying to reach out to more professionals out there to come and be part of us. The link is in the chat. And the contacts of the people, if you're in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, the contact people are there. So I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I'll be available to answer any questions in the chat. Thank you so much.
Hi, Douglas. Before you go, I just wanted to make an announcement. Yes, we're just in midway our session. We are still left with 6.2 and 6.3. For those who are asking, yes, Dennis will be back. He just finished the tip of the iceberg. I hope our brains are not tired. There's a question for you here. Will there be virtual attendance, Douglas, for the East African Conference?
Yes,
Will there be
about
virtual
that.
attendance?
Yes, about that. Actually, we are trying to see how to integrate that into the program, and I'll be able to revert tomorrow during the same time. Or in case I get something during this meeting, I'll be able also to share that feedback, but it's something that is being discussed to have that inclusion. Thank you.
Okay. We have a question about, all right, this is for the presenter. Yes, Blaze, we shall engage the facilitator on the screen. Any more questions regarding the conference? Douglas, have you already got a date for the conference?
The conference is next week on 28th and 27th of August. That is a Thursday and Friday. The last
Douglas, you're dodging the question. I was meaning, do you have a date as yourself?
Oh, a date. I think I can take Joanna.
Okay. I see. What makes you think she doesn't have someone? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited to welcome you into this day 2 of our session. It's really interesting how we have different professionals. I am just seeing from the chat, just from yesterday to today, we have fleet managers. I see QA, QC, civil. We had a lawyer. We have apprentices in here. So we have students also in the session. We have lecturers. There's an environmental consultant. We have an aftermarket commercial engineer. We have Sheikh executives, lead auditors, so many lead auditors. I'm very sure they are happy to also share the knowledge. Maybe next time they'll be the ones taking us through this free session as long as they engage Ronald Ronald over there. We have health specialists. We also have OSH professionals. Wow, this is a great session and a great way to interact. Please keep on putting in your thoughts, your questions, and your comments into the chat as we engage more. If there are more questions for the conference, Douglas is still with us.
Yeah, Christian. Thank you, Paul.
Sorry, we lost you.
A link to be able to join in the WhatsApp group where we're going to be sharing the sessions for the week. So there is already a session for yesterday that was shared, a link, and also a WhatsApp link for the group. So kindly make use of them so that you can be able to get the material.
So we broke out at 7:49. So I believe we can invite the facilitator back at 8 p.m. And by that time, I believe he'll be also done with his stretching and with his coffee. Maybe I also noticed something very interesting. From the attendance, we also had a large number of people, not only from East Africa, but also from the diaspora. We have people from UAE, we have people from Qatar, amongst many. And of course, Africa is represented from Uganda, Zambia, Kenya, Tanzania, Zimbabwe. It's wonderful. And Ghana.
We welcome all the practitioners all across the world. Feel free to engage in the chat. Yes, some of you have asked for the link for the group. We're going to reshare it, and also the link for the WhatsApp group. One has requested that is it possible to get today's session in time before tomorrow's lecture? We'll try to see how to work on that. That we share before tomorrow 6 p.m. Let's try to work through that. But yes, just engage through the groups and we shall be able to share all this information. Otherwise, maximize your break because it's almost done so that we get to dive in deep into the brain.
You'll see how all of it will sync in Prime Distributors Limited. Please keep attentive, keep joining us. 3 days more to go. We'll finish with Dennis today and we see how we can have our services, our companies, our organizations work best to the ISO standards 45001, 14001, and 9001. If you have any questions, go ahead to ask. Those who have fast knowledge in ISO standards, you can always ask and get clarification. Do not be afraid. This is something new. There are changes happening every day. The professionals know that in ISO, there is always continuous improvement. There is continued improvement. So there is not knowing too much and there is not knowing too little. Please, let's continue to engage. Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Dennis. Thank you for the first session. Our brains are still attentive and the audience is ready for you. The floor is yours.
All right. So thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, Joanna. And I'm happy that people are learning, which is a good thing. So in the interest of time, I would want us to go to, I know I'll go through the questions quite later. So let me go through 6.2. Remember, we've gone through 6.1. 6.1 is really, really about addressing risk and opportunities. And do not forget opportunities. It's a very key thing. Next month, when we start on the new standard, of course, you have 3 years to transition. Really look at how you can pursue and add value. So in 6.2, we're looking at objectives and plans to achieve. Remember, the previous slide, we were looking at actions. You've just had actions because you've talked about risk. Here, we're looking at objectives, and we want to make sure these objectives are smart and you have plans, concrete plans on how you can achieve these objectives. So let us see, what does the standard say? It says the organization shall establish objectives at relevant functions and levels. Okay? Functions and levels. Could be processes, could be departments, okay? And levels. So in Prime distributors, you have business level, you have manager level, you have shop level, you have supervisory level. So you have to establish objectives at relevant, not all, but relevant functions and level. And these objectives need to be consistent. And we're going to see the linkage between objectives and policy, okay? Should be consistent with the policy, that one-page document that Gladys showed you yesterday, and be measurable if practicable. I know there are certain situations where you might not be able to measure, but you should be in position to track them over time. And then 3, it should be taking into consideration requirements, risk, opportunities, and results of workers' consultation, and be communicated and updated. Okay, so this is what the standard says, and it also says you need to show proof that you did it. So it has to be maintained as documented information. So I want to walk you through how do you capture these objectives, how do you keep it, and how do you show proof that actually you're tracking them over time. And lastly, it says that you need to have plans to achieve them. In 6.2.2, as you can see down here, it talks about what will be done. So when you have an objective, let's, for example, you want to reduce forklift instances, what will you do? Are you going to train? Okay. Are you going to, put blind spot mirrors or something like that? Okay. What resources are required? So you have to list them. Who will be responsible? When will it be completed? And how will those results be evaluated? To take you back, objectives need to be SMART. What does SMART mean? SMART means they need to be specific. You don't say we are going to just, you don't choose a generic statement and say we're going to just reduce, we're going to train staff. Train them in what? What are you going to train them? Is it permit to work? Is it work at height? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it environmental auditing? What is it that you're going to train? So you have to be specific. And 2, it has to be measurable, if practicable, okay? Because if you can't measure it, you may not be able to track it, and neither will you be able to manage it. So you need to make sure you're able to manage to measure an objective that you've set. Is it you're reducing it by, let's say, 5%? Are you reducing maybe an injury by 5%? Or you're reducing incidents from 10 to 5? How are you doing it? Okay. And then it has to be achievable. Sometimes we call it agreed. So if you have a baseline, you know that in the last quarter, we had a target of, let's say, closure of audit findings, which were 10. Okay. And now you want to achieve, let's say you wanted to achieve 80% in the quarter 2. From quarter 1, which was 60%, quarter 2 is 80%. Okay, so you will have to have a baseline. You are at 60, now you want to go at 80% closure of a gap. Okay, so you need to have a baseline for it to be achievable. But when you say, I'm going to achieve 100%, someone will ask you, from where is your baseline? So you need to have a baseline that you can follow to make sure your objectives are achievable. Stretch objectives are encouraged because it helps you to work harder. But making objectives which cannot be achieved is not a good thing. Then objectives need to be relevant. What does it mean to be relevant? Being relevant means that it has to have a line of sight to the policy. Remember, you're looking at three management systems. You're looking at health and safety, which focuses on prevention of injury and ill health. Okay, you're looking at environment, which is talking about prevention of pollution, conserving the environment. You're talking about quality, which is talking about meeting customer requirements. Okay, so you need to make sure there's a line of sight to that. There has to be a line of sight. There has to be a line of sight how it links to compliance obligations. Okay, so that is how you see relevance. It has to be relevant to the scope, to the activities that you're doing on ground. There has to be relevance. And some objectives are not as soon as possible. No, they have to have a time stamp. Where are we ending? Where is the milestone? Is it 31st of December this year? Is it 30th of June next year? We need to have a date. So as you set objectives, they need to be SMART, specific, measurable, agreed or achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And these objectives then need to have plans. What will be done, what resources are required, who will be responsible, and when it will be completed, and how these results will be evaluated. Okay, so we're going to see how do our risk link to objectives. So at Prime Distributors, we do workers consultation through our committee. So top management at Prime Distributors has established the policy and plans. So our plans are aligned to one thing, the policy statement. Secondly, the high priority legal obligations, the significant environmental aspects, and the hazards that we have picked out from the processes that we went through in 6.1.1. Okay, so these relevant objectives were established at all levels, at all relevant levels, and our levels are management level, which is level 1, supervisory level, which is a level 2, officer level, which is level 3, and shop floor levels. Okay, so it's not that every process will have an objective, but it has to be relevant. So for each objective and target, the step-by-step description of how these targets is to be achieved is then given out, and we shall look at it in our next slide. So of course, as you're establishing objectives, one thing that you need to show evidence that you're actually doing is that you need to have documented objectives, which are SMART. You need to have programs to show how you are going to do, which resources, who is responsible, and how these will be, the results will be achieved. Those are programs to achieve objectives. Then there has to be communication of these objectives to staff. These are your objectives, and so it can be communicated on email, notice boards, whatever. Okay, and then evidence of regular updates on these objectives. So there has to be some forums where these objectives keep being updated, whether on a monthly, whether quarterly, whether by annual basis. Okay, so that is how you link risk to objective. The reason why we're linking it, because we spent a lot of time thinking. So we need to make sure that we set objectives. So we focus on those objectives, knowing that it will address the risk that we determined. So let me show you a linkage. And many of participants here, I believe you have health and safety and environment quality policies, what we call the integrated management policy. Okay, so you'll see words like we will achieve customer satisfaction. Most of the policies that I've seen, you'll see that word. The question is, which objective are you trying to achieve? So here, we are trying to achieve a high level of service satisfaction. Okay? But the question is, which indicator would you use to track that we are actually achieving this? You can do a survey, whether it's a survey monkey or whatever survey that you can do. So you do a survey and the results will show you where you are. Okay? Then possible targets. So you want to achieve an overall rating, let's say, of 5.5 by 31st of December 2027. But remember, when you're linking this in this table, it is basically showing you the objective, showing you what the policy aspirations were, the indicators and the possible targets. It's not showing you the resources. Okay, it's not showing you who is responsible. So, and it's not, so those are what we then put in what we call plans to achieve objectives. Okay, so I'll not go through the other two policy aspirations because I believe you can read them. But then, now, having looked at these aspirations, linked them to these objectives, the next thing now you have to have objective targets and plans, one comprehensive document. Remember in the previous slide, we said achieve an overall rating of 5.5 level of service user satisfaction. The question is, what will be done? This is a very important question. What are you going to do? Most of the time, we have objectives. You even don't know what you're going to do. You don't know what activities you're going to do. You're just there. But you need to have what is it that you're going to do. So in this case, you can have chat tools for instant help. So someone has a problem online, you just log in and it gives you an answer. And then in case you need to refer to maybe someone to speak to you, and then they can be able to connect. Okay. And then what resources are required? So since this is a chat tool, it's a software, you have to look at how much it will cost you to install this and who is responsible. So in this case, it's public relations. Okay. And when will it be completed? So 31st of December, 2027. How will these results be evaluated? So when you do your surveys and you check your chat apps, you can be able to analyze, okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, so are we at 5.5 or we're now at 7? Okay. So that is how you come up with plans. I'll give you another example for those of you who are maybe in the environment sector. So you have to reduce electricity usage in the warehousing by 10%. By 10%. Remember, it was an aspiration in your policy where you said we shall reduce energy usage. Okay. Now we're saying reduce electricity usage in the warehousing operation by 10%. So the question is, what are you going to do? So we say we're going to install energy saving equipment. Okay, energy saving, that means you're using less power. 2, we are going to have motion sensors. So instead of lights shining in the washrooms or in the corridors all the time, so until someone gets there, then that is when the light comes on. So then you have to ask yourself, what's the budget of acquiring these resources? And then assign it to the utilities manager, and then ask yourself, when will this be completed? So how will you evaluate that you're actually at 10% or 5% or 15%? That is when now you check your quantity of electricity consumed per warehousing operation. Okay, so if you have smart energy meters installed, for example, you'll be able to check that maybe on this week, on this date, you use so many, let's say, kilowatts of energy. Okay, so that is an example. For those of you who are in the health and safety space, you may be thinking about how then do we reduce, how do we have a plan for incidents? And I'll ask this maybe in the chat. For companies in here, do you have numbers to say, let's say we're going to reduce accidents from 10 to 8 or 8 to 2? Do you have those accidents? Do you have those statistics in your objectives, or do you use percentages? I would want to understand from the chat. Do you use percentages, or do you use actual numbers when you're coming up with objectives for instance, safety incidents at workplace? I would like to know. So most people are saying they use.
We have three percentages. One person uses. We have 4%.
Yeah. So yes, sometimes people use
5%.
Rates. Okay, I've
Yes,
seen rates.
some with both. One person uses both.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
that is mostly percentages.
And some percentages linked to actual numbers. So the question I would want to ask, and just remain on the chat in there, as why is it that we use percentages or we use rates and we don't use numbers? What is the essence behind it?
One said that they work in a transit company. For the objectives, they use the percentages, and for monthly tracking, they use the numbers. And the other says percentages show actual progress. Others say percentages better cause the number of employees may increase or reduce.
Yeah. So, all right.
There is an
Thank you.
explanation here. It
Yes.
says the percentage is easier for employees to understand. Whereas someone who talks about the LTIFR are useful when determining occupational health and safety objectives because it converts lost time injuries into standardized performance indicator, allowing an organization to track whether its safety performance is improving over time. Well, I hope we didn't cheat. All right. I think that's it. Someone says the percentages, the changes in numbers.
Okay. Interesting conversation. And I think keep the chat going and keep engaging. So, of course, I've seen this. I've seen organizations and I've been challenged in many places where someone says, okay, we are going to reduce, let's say, our fatalities from 3 to 2. What comes to your mind? When someone says we're going to reduce fatalities from 3 to 1, what comes to your mind? Remember here, you're using numbers, okay? You're using numbers, and someone is thinking, oh, so you want to kill someone, okay? So it's in safety, it's a little bit, there are moral reasons as to why sometimes we try to, someone says you're targeting to kill people. So you shouldn't be targeting to kill people, okay? So, and I think that is the reason as to why we try to, try to coin it behind percentages and all that to hide the numbers behind. But the most important thing is that we need to reduce on injuries. We need to have 0 injuries as much as possible because we do not intend to kill people. Okay, we do not intend to kill people. So what does it mean? That we need to make sure we have very smart, very smart objectives. Okay. Someone says it's a very diplomatic form of communication. Yes. So reducing lost time injury rates to 2.5% below industry average. So you can shoot, because in prime distributors, we have forklift operators, and then we also have truck drivers. And from our instant investigation, we realized that instances were actually happening from there. So we said, okay, what do we need to do? We need to train our forklift operators and truck drivers, defensive driving, making sure that they are trained by a certified driver, but also for high risk operations, because we have cleaning operations taking place. We have repackaging, we have maintenance, we have transportation. So it's a matter of having these permits to work audits done, so that the permits to work process is actually followed. If there's a work at height activity that is taking place, then the process of work at height is really, really followed, so that the controls are really done. And this assigned to the health and safety manager, making sure that by the end of the year, these instant trends are actually reduced to 2.5 below industry average. Yeah. So, so what are those common pitfalls? Okay. Common pitfalls. One, when you see most of the policies that we have, you have in your companies, please, if you have one nearby you, check whether there's a commitment on a framework for setting objectives in the policy. Okay. Most of the time, from my previous experience, you find this commitment is not there. What actually people do, they go and list all the objectives in the policies. No, that's not, because it says you need to have a framework. What framework how are you going to set objectives? Is it at management level, different levels, different functions? Okay. So this commitment, and the moment this commitment is missing, then it trickles down, and then later on you do not have objectives which are concrete or robust. And then same risk for over 3 years with no objectives, and you have significant risk. You have significant risk year 1, year 2, year 3, but you do not have objectives for them. It's really, puts a question mark. You have things that are causing pollution or causing injuries or causing customers to be dissatisfied, and you do not have a risk. Then you need to ask yourself why. So objectives also need to be smart, but they do not have to cover low effort risk. Okay. Objectives don't need to be at only business level. Okay. They need to be at all relevant factions and levels within the businesses. And for you to be able to track whether they're achievable over time and track progress, you need to have a baseline. Where are you starting from? And you need to continuously review it from time to time. In order for you to really progress much, you need to make sure in the best practices here, especially number 3, you need to have very good, clear ownership. Okay, assign these objectives to specific people so that they can be able to implement them, but of course with resources. Make sure resources are provided, and integrate objectives and plans into business planning using management softwares. Even these isometrics and other softwares that you may use, you can put your objectives there. It will really make for you a wonderful report and track progress over time, and you'll be able to efficiently and effectively manage the management system. Okay, so those are objectives. The last one, which is the last clause, sub-clause or clause, is 6.3, planning of changes. And this is one area where we said we need to put a lot of time. And I'll give you exactly 20 minutes and we'll go through this so that we get it right. So we know what changes are. Changes happen every day. They can happen because you've introduced a new product. They can happen because you've introduced a new line, a new construction. You've added a new facility, let's say a warehouse. You have processes that are changing, and technology that keeps changing from time to time. You have suppliers who are new, and other suppliers who keep coming in, contractors. They're coming to do different work. All these are changes. You have mergers, acquisition, organization CEO has changed, general manager has changed, the board has changed. Those are changes. So you need to implement management of change. The other thing, of course, is new laws coming, whether it's in Uganda, we had the Occupational Health and Safety Amendment Act, which was 2025. Well, the Employment Amendment Act, which I think is 2026. You have new laws coming in. So the question is, these are changes. how are you integrating these changes into your management system? There are also changes in emergency preparedness. Okay, so these changes are actually taking place. The standard says the organization determines the need for changes to the management system, and the changes shall be carried out in a planned manner, considering the following: purpose of changes and their potential consequences. So what does it mean? You need to ask yourself, why am I doing this change? And what is the impact of this change? Okay. And then nextly, how does it affect the soundness, the effectiveness of the management system? The availability of resources. Do you have resources to implement this change? And will we allocate responsibilities and authorities, or do we need to reallocate some responsibilities and authorities because we are implementing change? This is what the current standard says. But when you look at the ISO 9001:2026, which will be published on 16th of September next month, okay, it says you need to, one, have identify need, purpose, assess impact, plan, and have resources. Sorry. And when you look at this, it's basically the 6.3, which is up here. Okay. But it goes further and says you need to communicate these changes to affected parties using appropriate channels. 3, it says you have to execute the change according to the plan and control the risk. So this is implementation. And 4th, you have to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of these KPIs and data coming out of the change, because you're implementing this change because you want to make sure that there's an objective that you want to make sure is fulfilled. So how is it affecting your performance? Because you put in a change. And then review results over time and then achieve intended results. So that is what the new standard is saying, that the current standard is not very clear on the process, but it tells you what you need to consider. So in the new standard, they're telling you follow these steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in order to be to have a proper management of change process. So we're going to look at an example at prime distributors. So at prime distributors, during a management review, it was reported that one of the warehouses in Entebbe, the one that you see on your left, on your right there, had registered high forklift near misses and 30% storage deficit. Because the high forklift near misses, the HSC guy presented this report and told them, no, okay, near misses are just way too much. We need to put in controls so that we do not hurt anyone. And then we have the warehouse guy saying, no, we also have a 30% storage deficit, okay? Because we do not have storage and everything is all over the place. So we need to make sure that we have controls. And then you have the ICT guy saying we have downtime, 8-hour downtime per month, okay? And of course, which is affecting finance as well. So the general manager instructed management to assess the impact of installing convex blind spot mirrors, which the HSC manager had suggested in the meeting at high risk intersections. So one thing that you need to know is that when you have top management telling you to follow a process, it's very good. Rather than saying, oh, so you're a general manager, just install. No, you need to go through a process and assess the impact. Why are you installing these blind spot mirrors? You could put it there and then someone hits his head on a blind spot mirror. You're introducing another risk. So you need to, check and assess these changes that you want to make so that it doesn't introduce new risk. And then the other thing was a suggestion from the warehouse manager that we need to reconfigure pallet ranking from single deep to low aisle high density layout so that you have more storage. And the ICT guy was like, no, also we need to upgrade our software so that we do not have these security issues. So all these are good, I could call them changes to take place because you're addressing health and safety. One person is also addressing storage, which is a quality issue and also a software issue. So you need to have a change management process. At prime distributors, we have the change management process. The reference is there. So we have a change committee like you would have in in other companies, you have a modification committee. You want to make a modification on an equipment, but in prime distributors, we call them a change committee. So every time there is a change that needs to be made, the committee sits, reviews the impact of this change, propose changes. How is it beneficial? They get either approval or rejection. Okay, and then we put these proposed changes in what we call a change form, and then it's later approved by the general manager. So one lesson that you need to learn as you implement change management, you need to have a documented process of change management and a form completed. A form that is completed shows that you are actually implementing the management system. Okay, so a form can be a change request form. It can be, and a change request form then goes and you can update that and and you get what you call a change register. Okay. Risk assessment was also integrated in the process of change management. As you can see up there, they have to check the impact. Then stakeholders were involved in the review of the proposed changes because you have to sit down and assess as IT, as a warehouse manager, as a health and safety. What are you saying about this proposed change? Is it necessary? Then a person of higher authority approves the changes, okay? Who was general manager. So the evidence you need to provide to show that you're actually doing this, you need to have a documented management of change process. You also need to have a duly completed management of change form or register, okay? So let's look at how a change register looks like. So a change register has a change requester. So the request for a change. So in this case, it was general manager requested for a change, and this change is then you can have what you call a change request form. So you fill in that change request form. So it can be a physical document or it can be an online document. Okay. And then the next thing is, what is the description about this change? So the change is install blind spot mirrors in the warehouse. Okay, what's the reason? We want to reduce traffic collision. Okay, so what is the potential impact of this change? Is low, quick installation. Okay, potential impact is low because, I mean, it's quick installation. Just, place it there and yeah, it works for you. Is it a high priority? Yes, there are so many near misses, so we don't want to have a fatality. So who is responsible? We have the maintenance manager. Resources required, your blind spot mirrors, your personnel, installation, tools, etc. General manager looks at it, looks at the budget and says, okay, let's approve it. There's no reason to reject this change. Okay, so you could also do the same for the warehouse management system. You have features that you need to include to improve security so that you minimize downtime. Okay, so you check, is it medium, is it high priority, and then you also place it there. So given that the budget was there, but it's also a process to acquire the software, so this was in progress. Okay, same with pallet racking and layout. Okay, there was need to increase storage capacity by 20%. What was the impact? So we don't have disruption in picking of items on different routes. You just go pick and go. Okay, so this was also approved, but you have to check the resources that you have, the responsible people that are required, and if there's any reason for rejection of the change, then it's also put in place. So a duly completed risk register looks exactly like this. So you can add also other sections. It can be in Excel. You can include it probably in your other softwares. So a duly completed risk register, you can be able to present this and show that, oh yes, I've been able to complete. Remember, in ISO, do not make things very complicated. Just show that you are being able to meet those sub-clauses in the requirement, okay? Provided you show that, then that is well and good, okay? Now, best practices, one, you need to have documented change management process. We already talked about it. Now, because change involves people, you need to sit down with people. You need to have a committee. In some organizations, they have modification committees. So they sit down, they assess the change. And modifications are usually for modifications, let's say, on equipment, okay? And thirdly, if it's, let's say, a high risk with, let's say, equipment or activity or project that is going to be done and there's need for change, Then you need to incorporate health and safety reviews, okay, where they review designs, they review the process that will take place so that you do not have instances where you have non-compliances, okay? Now, on the people side of change, it's good practice to adopt international models like the ADCA model, where it talks about creating awareness. When you create awareness, people desire that change, okay? But when you don't create awareness, someone will say, why would I desire the change? Because I do not know the benefit of that to me. What is it for me for that change? And then because of the knowledge, then you're able to reinforce this change over time. Common pitfalls that I've seen is that we usually do not get buy-in from our top leadership, okay? Especially in the people side of change. You want to change maybe culture, become more proactive, introduce management change. But trust me, someone on the shop floor will say, what is it, this ISO? What is it for me? I don't get it, okay? So when your team doesn't get it, then and they don't get to buy into that commitment, trust me, you'll walk the whole journey and you'll get frustrated. So it's very important that you get buy-in, especially from top leadership, okay? And also from the workers, because they can resist the change. And trust me, the whole program will fail. And the second pitfall is alignment to company culture, values, and beliefs. Companies have different cultures, they have different values, they have different beliefs, different aspirations, different mission, different mandates. So you need to make sure as you introduce this change, they try to create alignment and linkage to what this means to them, but also what it means to the business. Okay? It can mean something to the business, but if it doesn't mean to the person, trust me, they'll say, I do not get any benefit from this. So you need to make sure that there's alignment. Then changes are implemented but not implemented. Most of the time, you go do audits, you revise, we made changes, we introduced a new warehouse, we even rearranged this place, but there's nothing to show that actually changes were documented. And the reason is that because the whole process of change management is quite lengthy sometimes because you have to go through approval and someone's like, no, just putting a blind spot monitor or a convex mirror, no way, I can just put it. But you can change something, then it introduces another risk, okay? So it's very important that you assess changes within the organization. So at this point, I would want us to do a readiness check. Readiness check is basically trying to check in terms of clause 6 of the standard. Where do you fall? Okay. So ask yourself, have you identified risk and opportunities and actively updated them? Are you compliant? Are you partially compliant or are you non-compliant? Okay. Then the next thing you need to ask yourself, do you have an ongoing process to identify hazards in the work areas? And it's very clear. People are able to conduct hazard identification. I've been to, in my experience, I've seen companies that have a very long process. You're just identifying one hazard, but you have to fill like 6 pages. No, you have to make sure it's smooth. Someone can even be able to spot and say, this is a hazard, and it actually goes to the next person who is responsible. Then environmental aspects register. Does it follow a life cycle perspective, or you're just doing everything within your control? Okay, so it has to follow a life cycle perspective. Then number 4, you need to have up-to-date register of all applicable local, national, industry obligations maintained. It's not just the laws, not just the regulation, but you have trade agreements, you have contractual agreements. So you need to make sure that you have an up-to-date register. Scan for laws, scan for agreements, and make sure that your interested parties, all those expectations, which could be legal obligations, are captured. Then also check, have you established objectives, targets, and plans that are SMART? Okay, SMART meaning specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely at all relevant levels. Or is it only at business level and maybe the rest of you do not have them? So you need to have objectives set. And objectives can be set at different functions and processes, okay, provided they are relevant. And then you ask yourself, do you have a structured process to evaluate the purpose and the potential impact of changes to the management system? Remember, changes can be permanent, it can be temporal. So you need to have a structured process. Do you have a change management process that you follow? Okay. And then you check yourself. Are you partially compliant or compliant or non-compliant? So I would like to know from the team here and online, the participants, which of these areas are you non-compliant on? Which of these are you non-compliant on? Paul? Joanna?
We have some engagements in the chat. We have one from Paul, management of change. We have one answer. Let's keep engaging in the chat. Gabriel, you could engage in the chat for now. You also have another one from Francis, management of change. Just for the interest of time, let's keep engaging in the chat because time is not on our side. We have non-compliant in management of change, hazard identification. Most of the answers are actually saying management of change. Let's keep the engagements coming in. Yes, management of change still. So Dennis, we actually have most of them as management of change. We have one for gaps related to management of change committee. Yes, management of change again.
All right. So it looks like management of change is one of those areas where we are really not complying very well. So, and I think also I do not blame many companies because one of the standards, I think it's either the environment standard or health and safety, did not have that clause completely there. So if you are implementing that, then you would probably not, if you're implementing a single standard, you would probably ignore it. But remember, there's also management of change around clause 8, I think 8.1.3 or something like that in the ISO 45000. So I know the person who will come in for clause 8 will also tackle that. But just to let you know that you need to have a process. You need to have a process for management of change. When you have a process which is already approved by maybe your management team, that this is the process that will follow, then you know that in the event that we have these changes taking place, acquisition, new people, new plants, new operations, and the like, then you will be in position to implement the changes. But also, most importantly, is to make sure you have evidence to show that actually change was identified, change was registered, change was tracked over time. And that is where you have your change request forms, you have your change register to just have a log of the changes that happen and to show that there is actually approval of the changes. Okay, and at times there is also rejection, and of course with reasons. So it's not good to be a manager in a company and changes are actually happening, modifications are taking place, and you have not approved them. So you could introduce new risk, okay, and which could not be good for the business. So it's very important that we implement management of change. It's something that's doable. It can be done. We have some to think through it. And of course, I don't blame you because the current standard was not very clear. It gave you what you need to look at, but probably did give you the process, what you need to follow. So, but I know in the next standard that we will receive in the next month of ISO 9001, we will have a lot of light on that in regards to management of change or change management in a controlled manner. Okay. So allow me go to the next slide. So in the next slide, let's look at key takeaways. Okay. So the key takeaways is 1. You remember we mentioned that planning, clause 4 and clause 5, they're the foundation. It's very important. It's like building a house. You need to have a foundation. Okay. Okay. But clause 6 is where you think through things. You have to have your brain on the board. Don't go to AI, don't go to ChatGPT and pick things and put in the risk register, risk and opportunities and all that. No, use your brain. See what is on the ground. Okay. So if your planning process is totally weak, trust me, when it comes to operations, you will fail. Okay, so make sure the process of planning is strong, is robust. So have a clear roadmap and execute it in a very proactive manner. Okay. Secondly, risk assessments must reflect real working environment. So don't have this paperwork, you generate paperwork from company A, company B, company C, because you have a consultant probably who gave you templates. All these templates are able is for you to sit down and actually think through the different processes that you have and assess risk. Okay. Then 3, which we talked about, is that legal non-compliance can lead to a very major audit risk. Reason being is that most legal requirements, when you do not meet them, they'll lead to fines, they lead to penalties. I mean, they can even lead to closure of business. So make sure all legal non-compliances, or even almost all of them, or most of them, you need to consider them when you're setting objectives, because failure to meet them will result into very critical audit gaps. Then lastly is that objectives must be measurable. Do not have an objective that says as soon as possible, or that says that we will achieve something which is very unrealistic. So they need to be measurable. If at least they should be tracked, and you should have a baseline. What are you going to base on? Because without a number, you cannot tell if your work is actually helping you to succeed to meet your objectives. So objectives must be measurable and trackable, so progress can be evaluated. Okay, so that takes us to the very end of the slide. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share my presentation with you. I know you're from different fields across East Africa and Africa and the world, but we learn from each other. So I thank you for the opportunity, and you've been a very engaging team. I would like now to get your questions before I click to the very last slide. Thank you.